Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are finding yourselves as you tune in with us today. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Lindsay Fauntleroy. I'm so excited to be here with you. And I love all of the places and spaces people are chiming in from in the chat. Even saw someone from Brooklyn, which is my stomping ground. So welcome, 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 everyone. I'm so excited to be here and to share about this magical medicine, flower essences. And so I do have some slides that I prepared for you just to guide us through. I'm a very visual person. And so we'll get those up and running. And I thought I would start with sharing a little bit about myself and the two really defining moments that helped me to understand the magic that we're tapping into with flower essences and flower essence therapy for our emotional and spiritual wellness. And so in the next slide, you'll see a picture of me in 2003. I was in Ghana and I was staying with a shaman or a priest in the African spiritual traditions. His name was Baba Shangi. And I remember one day I was at his compound gate and I was sitting under this beautiful tree, and it had these big waxy leaves. And I almost felt myself going into a little bit of a trance. And I heard something say, I'm poison, right? And it was just like that. It was this soft, kind of sexy voice that said, I'm poison, right? And a few minutes later, my teacher came outside and he saw me sitting there under the tree and he said, watch out for that tree. It's poisonous. So that was my very, very first introduction to this idea that nature is constantly communicating with us and that it's not speaking to us necessarily through our physical ears, but that the language and the soul of nature can enter directly into our consciousness and give us messages if we are tuned in and paying attention. So that was my first lesson. And if you look at the next slide, what I learned from that experience, what I took from that experience, from being in the Gambia in West Africa, from going out and being in communion with nature, is that nature knows, that nature has some lessons, that it has a teaching, that it has a wisdom to share with humanity if only we're willing to listen. The next defining moment that you'll see in this picture here, and it's my little cherub, my daughter, is that this idea of soul medicine. So how I got introduced to flower essences was that I was in my early 20s and I was diagnosed with premature ovarian failure, which is what they called it at that time. And I was told that I could never, ever have children, that my ovaries were done. They weren't going to work anymore. It was over. The only way that I could have children was through IVF. And so I was heartbroken about this news and really devastated. And I went to my sister-in-law and she had all of these Bach flower remedies in her cabinet. And instead of talking to me about what I was going through and listening to me talk about the story over and over again, she just started putting these flower essences in a little glass of water, not like what I have in front of me. And I felt a shift. I felt something open. I felt something expand. And that is what really helped me to understand from the next slide this concept of what I talk about in my book, this idea of soul medicine, this idea that our true wellness includes tending to our hopes, dreams, desires, and frustrations of the soul. So moving beyond our physical bodies, the healing that I received from the spiritual work, from the working with the soul medicine, from the flower essences, from the acupuncture, from the yoga, all of the things that I'm bringing forward in my book, is that regardless of whether or not I was able to have a child, regardless of whether or not my body would cooperate with me, that I had to find a place of wholeness within my heart, regardless of the outcome in the physical world. It just so happened that the flower essences became a catalyst on my spiritual journey, and I was able to conceive and give birth to my daughter, who's now 15 and in a very different space than she was in that photo. But this idea of moving beyond just our bodies and having a medicine that is dealing with the heart is really what I want to bring forward when we're talking about flower essences. And so we move on to the next slide. And I'm loving the chat. Thank you so much, everyone, for all the love. So let's just start with what are flower essences. And I know some of you that are listening in are very experienced with flower essences. But in the next slide, I want to just show that, flower essences are not essential oils. I've been doing this work for nearly 2 decades, and it never fails that someone will ask me, what are flower essences? Or they'll say, oh, I know, I work with flower essences. I have a lavender in my diffuser, right? And so the first thing that want to point out is that essential oils are what's used in aromatherapy that we put on our diffuser or our candles or our lotions or use them therapeutically. But flower essences are actually more closely aligned with herbal supplements. We take them internally. We do 4 drops under the tongue or as needed for stress or personal growth. And so the flower essences that I'll be sharing and talking about today, just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. I'm not talking about something that you can smell. I still have family members that ask me if I can send them something that smells good in their room. And I'm like, that's not what I do. Okay, so moving on to the next. Many people may be familiar, you may have seen, these are 2 of the more popular brands of flower essences. The Bach Flower Remedies, of course, Bach is credited with bringing flower essence therapy to the Western world. And so his original line of 38 and 1 composite flower essences are widely available. FES, or the Flower Essence Society, which you can see in the picture on the right, is the research organization that I work in alignment with. I'm a practitioner through FES, as well as I facilitate their certification program to train new practitioners in the art of flower essence therapy. And their work spans over 40 years of in-depth magical and academic research in the field of flower essence therapy. And then in the next slide, you'll see my personal line of flower essences, which are composite blends, which I call the elementals. And I come to this work as an acupuncturist. And so I created a line of 5 element inspired flower essences to work with the archetypal energies of the 5 elements and the 5 patterns of soul lessons that we can learn from nature. So hopefully, if you have a chance to pick up my book and our element, you'll learn more about not just the flower essences, but those patterns of nature and those seasons of the psyche, as I like to call them. So in the next slide, I want to talk a bit first about just the general philosophy of flower essences, because even though Bach is credited with bringing them to the West in the 1930s, the work of working with the spiritual energies of plants and the intelligence of plants is very ancient art. And so if we look back at antiquity, we can see in numerous classical texts from all over the continent, from indigenous spiritual systems all over the continent, an idea in many translations that is called the anima mundi. So the anima mundi is a philosophy that says that we are of the soul of the world, so that everything is an interconnected field, that we are in communion with all of the plants and animals and cosmos of the earth. And it's a beautiful philosophy that we've really gotten away from as we live in a time where man is very separate from nature. And so in the next slide, I say that there's a philosopher, David Abrams, who works very much in the field of eco-psychology, which is an emerging field in psychology of reconnecting the human soul to this anima mundi. And he acknowledges that intelligence is no longer ours alone, but a property of the earth. We are immersed in it. And I love that he says each terrain, each ecology has its own intelligence, its own vernacular of soil and leaf and sky. And that's what we're tapping into when we're working with flower essences. We're tapping into that language very much in the same way that I heard that voice that was, I'm poison, right? It's how do we get these messages from nature and bring them into our psyche and our soul and our awareness. So quoting from In Our Element in the next slide, I say, our veins map our body just as the river streaming to the ocean. Our heart pulses with a sacred rhythm of the earth's heartbeat. The electromagnetic pulse that changes the seasons is the same electromagnetic pulse that changes our psyche. We are of shared pulse, shared blood, shared breath, and shared roots. And when we tap into that shared energetic field, we are tapping into what would we consider the anima mundi. And what I love about flower essences is that it is a modern, practical, and accessible way for us to tap into that shared intelligence with the natural world. Moving to the next slide, coming back to this concept that nature knows. So 4 key concepts. One is that mind and body are not separate. They exist on a continuum and they constantly reflect one another. Our illness can be physical, mental, emotional, or circumstantial. And this really comes out of indigenous wisdom. You know, often in the Western world, when we're thinking about health, we're thinking about the physical body. And there's a growing conversation about mental health and emotional health, especially with the last 2 years with COVID as the pandemic and just growing unrest. We're talking a bit more about mental health. We're talking a bit more about emotional health. But to the indigenous mind, health is also circumstantial. And so in my practice, the 2 things that bring people into my practice more than anything else is what I call money and honey. So money is the way that we relate to our personal gifts, not just our financial abundance, but how do we live on purpose and feel like we're really here to bring our own unique spark and creative genius. And then honey is relationships. And so if we're feeling a block in our money or honey, that is also a place of energetic imbalance that we can intervene with soul medicine and, of course, flower essences. The next concept is that healing is spiritual and that nature is always an ally. So you could go right ahead to the next slide. I love this picture here because it's bringing us back to a time that is deep in our ancestral psyche when we lived in a world where we could be in what this author calls portentous omen, meaningful communion with the earth, populated by the spirits of plants and animals, of rivers and oceans and wind and rain, that we were able to be connected to these signs of nature as signs of what's happening in our psyche, as above, so below, as within, so without, and as the universe, so the soul. Moving on to the next, also coming out of African spirituality systems, this idea that every plant, forest, rock, stream, and of course, flowers have an intelligence that has a consciousness. And then the next slide, we'll see that what a flower essence is an extraction of that intelligence, that consciousness, that intention, that wisdom infused into water so that we can medicinally take it into our own psyche. And today there are hundreds of flower essences that offer wisdom for our soul's hiccups, that humanity as needing to realign with the natural rhythms and psyches of the universe. Flower essences offer us a path to that alignment and to that wholeness. And so how do flower essences work, I believe, is where we're going next in the slides. Yes, so we can skip right on. And I want to leave some time for questions. So I want to make sure that I may be talking fast, but I want to definitely hear your questions and your experiences and what you have to say. So there's 3 core areas that I think about using flower essences for. The first is for unresolved emotions. So this idea that we're not trying to numb our emotions or make ourselves not feel anything, or even to make ourselves feel better. What flower essences offer is an opportunity to learn from the life force of our emotions. So what is our anger trying to teach us about change? What is our fear trying to teach us about caution? What is our jealousy trying to teach us about our own unrealized potential for greatness? That is what we're bringing forward and working with our flower essences when we're tapping into our unresolved emotions. The next area are our mental blocks. And so I call these again, moving with these, I call them mental shenanigans, all the things that our minds are doing that they're not really supposed to be doing. So that's when we can't focus or concentrate. That's when we have these repetitive negative thoughts that spontaneously emerge. When we can't quiet our mind in order to meditate or relax, when we can't make decisions, when we're beating up ourselves internally, or we can't find a solution. This is where the flower essences come in as an ally to help us straighten out those mental shenanigans. And then the last area, which is my favorite, by the way, where flower essences support us, is in our soul evolution. So these are the aspects of our psyche. These are what we consider these soul lessons that we came to earth to learn. And so they are defining threads in the tapestry of our life. So if I have a challenge trusting my intuition, that trust, that lack of trust in my own inner compass is going to show up in my work. It's going to show up in my relationships. It's going to show up in my parenting. It's going to show up when I'm in the grocery store trying to figure out which milk to buy. It's a way, a tapestry, a thread that once we begin to unlock that thread, it begins to unravel and realign the tapestry in other areas of our life. So flower essences are really a beautiful, gentle, yet profound medicine for tapping into those places where our soul is trying to learn a lesson to evolve forward. And we just need a little bit of support from the natural world to get us back into alignment and wholeness. And the next slide. When we're working with flower essences, we often see this iceberg as a metaphor for the mind, with this little piece at the top being, what we can consciously perceive, and all of this stuff underneath being the subconscious mind. And the flower essences help us to unlock our perceptions and how we interpret things. As we see in the next slide, that our experience, what we can perceive in the physical world, is just one small part of our existence. And underneath that iceberg are how we interpret things, our core beliefs and our thinking, which may be faulty, by the way, or limited, our emotions, which may be stuck or need to be rewired. How we respond to things is a direct response to how we perceive and what energies we awaken. And so with flower essences, we're going beneath the iceberg. We're not working directly on the experience itself. We're working at all of the things that create the experience to create some more harmony. And yes, I totally agree with what's being shared in the chat around wishing Western medicine would take on some of these truths and ideas. And if we stay in it, I think we're getting there. We're opening those doors. And the next slide. When you're working with flower essences, what to expect is that you first have to slow down because they are so gentle. They don't hit you over the head like some pharmaceutical medicines do, or even some herbal medicines that can be quite powerful. The flower essences I think of as an invitation. So in my mind, the way I organize it is that a pharmaceutical will do it for you, will take on the physiological function for you. An herbal medicine will teach your body how to take on a physiological function or a function in the physical world, but a flower essence will simply invite you or motivate you. And so if we're not paying attention, we may miss that gentle, quiet invitation to make a shift or a change in our physical reality or circumstance. And so I'd love to share just a few ways that, or things to look for when you're working with flower essences. The first is that our dreams might awaken. You might start getting dreams or even daydreams that provide symbolic or archetypal insight into a place of your inner work. The next is insights. So there's an awareness that happened. I call it like peeling the layers of an onion, where you get an insight to, oh, that's why I'm doing that thing, or that's why I'm saying that thing, or that's how I actually feel in the situation. So it's a beautiful awakening and insight into our inner world that the flower essences bring forward. The next area are my favorite, these epiphanies, these sudden aha moments that give you insight into how to make a change. So one of my flower essences is called Embodied Light, and I use it for folks that are trying to change their physical health regimen. And always when someone is using that flower essence, they'll come back to me and they'll say, oh, I figured out when I can go to the gym, or I figured out which diet is going to work for me. It's this aha that gives us insight into how to move through a stuck place. The next are relationship shifts, changes in how we react to a person, changes in how we're triggered in ways that feel absolutely authentic. And so an example I can give is with my eloquence flower essence that is about authentic communication. And it has all kinds of things in it, like larch from the Bach flower line or lapis lazuli as a gem elixir. And so it opens the throat chakra. And I'll often find that, folks that are working with the flower essence, they'll start speaking up differently. Or maybe in some cases, they start not speaking up as much because their mouth has been getting them into trouble. So it's this beautiful dynamic way that we start to shift in our relationships, either showing up with more vulnerability or more compassion that often gets only reflected to us through our loved ones and the people that are closest to us. Then the next area is, all of these are my favorite, but definitely this coincidence and synchronicity, this being able to live in a space of what's called kairos, or the opportune time or the opportune moment, as opposed to chronological time, that being in the right place, right time, being in alignment when you run into someone that you were thinking about, or they call you, or you just so happen to see this billboard that has a message for you. Which brings me to my final, I believe one of my final slides, the book, Conversations with God by Neale Donald Walsch. There's a point in the book where he's asking, and he's in conversation with God, and he says, how will I know that you're talking to me? How do I know you're sending me a message? And this is what I imagine the flower essence is saying to us. Be on the lookout. The words to the next song you hear, the information in the next article you read, the storyline of the next movie you watch, the chance utterance of the next person you meet, or the whisper of the next river, the next ocean, the next breeze that crosses your ear. This is how we align with the Anima Mundi. This is how flower essences invite us to be back in a shared conversation with the entire universe and cosmos. So before we go into the chat, I see some questions about flower essences that I want to get to. I'm so excited to be part of the Llewellyn family, that my book will be out August 8th, and it is available for pre-order at inourelementbook.com. You'll also see on the website a link to my flower essences, where I have some quizzes where you can do a self-assessment to see which flower essence might work best for you for whatever you're working through at this time. And you can also find me on Instagram at Lindsay Faunt. So please follow me, and I'd love to stay in connection and communication with you on the gram. I do some lives, I do some sharings about essences that are up for the moment that we're in, based on the lunar cycle, based on the 5 element cycle, and based on the shifts that are happening in the collective that are reflected in our own inner journeys. So I would love to turn my attention to the chat and answer some of the questions. One of the questions that came up I saw earlier was a question about recommended flower essences for grounding. And I would love to direct you to one of my elementals essences, which is called Reconnect, which I actually created during COVID because so many of us were what I call dried and fried from being on so much Zoom and these electromagnetic fields that we can feel a little frenetic. And so Reconnect is one of the flower essences that I recommend for coming back to ourselves, coming back to the openness and receptivity in our heart space when we're feeling a little up in our heads and a little, staticky. So I'm seeing in the chat, you're absolutely welcome. I'm glad that some folks are making some shifts to exploring flower essences. I always say that flower essences are the wellness industry's best kept secret. I don't know why they're so on the outskirts of the alternative medicine field, but they are so accessible, relatively affordable as it relates to medicine, and they're pretty easy to find. And I'm sorry, my light just did something weird, but I'm going to just stay in it. The question, do most health food stores carry these? I would say the larger health food chains, and I don't want to, promote any particular chain, but the larger health food chains will carry more of the Bach essences. They are honestly a bit easier to find. More smaller, nuanced apothecaries, herbal apothecaries will often carry the FES line and some of the elementals, some of my line of essences. My essences are also available with a lot of acupuncturists and wellness clinics, and all of them are pretty easy to find online, Etsy, Amazon to some extent, personal practitioner websites. and things like that. How many flower essences can a person take? Oh, that is such a delicious question. So, generally speaking, if you're using flower essences for symptoms, I recommend not taking more than 2 or 3 at a time, or working with more than one formula at a time. When you're working with a formula, you can have up to 9 or 10 flower essences together, but the caveat is that if you're putting a large amount of flower essences together, we use the principles of sacred geometry to make sure those flower essences are cooperating as a coherent whole. So, for example, in my practitioner program, we have a class called Sacred Geometry, where we teach practitioners how to organize the flower essences in such a way that it's not creating static from too many messages from the soul. So that's my caveat. I would say if you're new to flower essences, I would narrow it down to 2 or 3 individual essences or one formula at a time that you work with for at least 2 weeks. And if you're a more advanced practitioner, I invite you to learn more about how to combine essences through sacred geometry principles so that those formulas are coherent. Looking in the chat, let's see, there's a few really great ones. So I'm just reading from the bottom up, and I'm sorry if I'm missing any. The question from Amanda says, do you ever use astrological charts of any system to get a sense of someone's innate elements to prescribe may be lacking in their elemental ecosystem? That's a great question, because what I say about the elements is that all medicines that originate in indigenous cultures, whether we're talking about yoga or astrology, or even flower essence therapy, 5-element theory, they're all related to nature. However, each of those systems has a different relationship to the elements. So the best example I can give is, fire, the element of fire. If I live in Alaska where it's cold, I'm going to have a different relationship to fire than someone who lives in a desert. So I caution folks not to try to cross mix and say, okay, this, fire element is lacking in their chart, so I'm going to give them a fire element essence. What we do in the practice of flower essence therapy is we treat what is directly in front of us. So if someone has a astrology background and they're a seasoned practitioner, they may be able to look at someone's chart and see what transits are happening, and then see what soul lessons are coming up from those transits, and then pick a flower essence that speaks to that soul lesson that's emerging. But it may be a completely different element than where that planet is transiting. So that's kind of a short story of it. I hope that makes sense. But I do use these archetypal systems together, but I try to keep them each intact within their own wisdom, because when you start to mix them together, it gets a little messy and confusing, quite honestly. A question, which course do you work with sacred geometry? Sacred geometry is actually one of the courses that I teach as part of the practitioner certification program. So it is an open level course, but it's a required course for those who are training to be flower essence practitioners. I do teach on, the question in the chat is, do I teach online? I do teach online. It's actually a different website, but you can get to it through the book. It's called thespiritseed.org. And we offer online classes year round. And then the program culminates with a practitioner supervised clinic, which practitioners do in their own cities, either virtual or live. Thank you for the love that is showing up in the chat. And I think we have time for one more question. I'm not sure if there were any that I missed. Oh, these are great questions. If taking prescribed medications, do you need to consult with your doctor or pharmacist first? Are they safe to be taken with other pharmaceuticals? That is such a layered and loaded, and in this, we have a very legally based medical system. So what I would say is that it's twofold, that flower essences, as they were conceived by Dr. Bach, are meant to be self-care remedies. They're meant to be medicines that we have in our medicine cabinet that we can use on our own, following our intuition, following the, what's prescribed in the materia medica for them. And also, if you are working with a doctor for any kind of internal medical condition, including pregnancy. If you're taking any other medications for anxiety, for depression, I would always either consult with your physician or ask a certified practitioner to consult with your physician so that they can answer any questions that may come up. As it came up in the chat earlier, there is a lot of dissonance between the Western medicine world and alternative medicine, and sometimes antagonistic. And so sometimes a practitioner can help to bridge that gap in a way that makes it easier to facilitate communication. Let's see, any others that I may have missed? Yes, if it's okay to take other plants with flower essences. I always say that flower essences, herbal remedies, homeopathic remedies, I call them all country cousins. They love to communicate, and I consider them octaves of one another. So they will resonate with one another. They will support one another. So you can definitely mix your different plant remedies together, but always bringing a sense of presence, a sense of paying attention. I think that's the most important thing, to be able to be present to the subtle shifts that are happening, because your body will tell you, your heart will tell you when you're doing too much, or when you need to do a little bit more, or when you need to stop with something. And so we don't want to override that innate intelligence that's connected with the natural world when we're bringing this medicine into our life. Thank you all so much for your love. I hope that you will stay connected with me and my work. And I hope I will see you in some of the other presentations here at LlewellynCon. I know I've been having a great time. And please, please, please stay in touch and check out the video on Llewellyn's YouTube channel if you want to play it back or share it. Thank you all, and have a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful day.